It is December 20th, 1968, a cold Friday night in Vallejo, California. A 17-year-old boy named David is getting ready for the most important night of his young life. He picks out his best clothes, a light blue shirt, a beige sport coat, brown corduroy pants. He checks himself in the mirror. He puts some change in his pocket. He grabs his mother's car keys and drives to pick up his girlfriend, Betty Lou. Their parents think they are going to a Christmas concert. They are not. They are headed to a quiet spot just off Lake Herman Road. A secluded turnout popular with young couples in the area, a place to be alone, away from parents and siblings and the noise of ordinary life. Betty Lou leans against David's shoulder. The night belongs only to them. And then, about an hour later, a second vehicle rolls slowly through the darkness and pulls up directly alongside their car. Shots are fired. David is hit before he can react. Betty Lou scrambles out of the passenger door and runs. She makes it several meters before the stranger catches her. 5 shots strike her in the back. By 11:14 that night, both teenagers are dead. And somewhere in the darkness of Northern California, the man who killed them is already driving away, slowly, carefully, so as not to draw attention to his car. He has just committed the first murder of one of the most baffling, most written about, most obsessively studied unsolved cases in the entire history of American law enforcement. He will never be caught. He will never be identified. And decades later, the world is still trying to understand who he was and why he did what he did. His name, the name he gave himself, was the Zodiac. Welcome to World Unveiled. And what you're about to hear is the story of the hunt for America's most mysterious killer. To understand why the Zodiac case gripped the entire nation and has never truly let go, you need to understand what made it different from every other serial killer investigation that came before it. Most killers, however violent, however calculating, operate in silence. They commit their crimes and disappear back into the anonymity of ordinary life. The Zodiac did something different. Something that transformed a series of brutal murders into something closer to a deadly public performance. He wrote letters, he mailed them to newspapers. He sent ciphers, elaborate coded messages, that he dared investigators and the public to decode. He gave himself a dramatic name, signed his letters with a distinctive crosshair symbol, and used the media with a sophistication that suggested he understood something that most killers did not. That the story he was creating was in some ways as important to him as the killings themselves. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be feared, and he wanted, above everything else, to never be caught. In all 3 of those ambitions, he succeeded completely. The murders began in late 1968 and continued through 1969. David and Betty Lou were the first confirmed victims, killed on a cold December night on Lake Herman Road. Months later, on the 4th of July 1969, a waitress named Darlene Farron and her friend Mike Mageau were attacked in a parking lot near a golf course on the outskirts of Vallejo. A man forced their car to stop, approached with a blinding flashlight, and opened fire. Mike was shot in the face and neck. Darlene was hit 9 times and died. Shortly after the attack, a man called the Vallejo Police Department. His voice was even and controlled, his words sounding almost rehearsed. He reported a double murder, gave a location, and then, almost casually, added that he had also killed the teenagers on Lake Herman Road the previous December. Then he hung up. Police traced the call to a public payphone. It was located directly in front of the Vallejo Sheriff's Office. In full view of law enforcement, the killer had made his call and walked away. The letters began arriving that summer. 3 nearly identical messages were mailed simultaneously to 3 different Bay Area newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each letter contained detailed information about the murders, information only the killer could have known. Each was paired with a section of a complex cipher, a coded message that the killer demanded the newspapers print on their front pages. If they refused, he threatened, he would go on a killing spree that very weekend. The newspapers printed the ciphers, and the name the killer gave himself in a follow-up letter. Chosen from the Zodiac circle of astrological signs, became one of the most recognizable names in the history of American crime. The Zodiac. The first cipher was cracked not by professional code breakers or government intelligence agencies, but by a married couple sitting at their dining room table. Donald and Betty Harden were both school teachers. That weekend they cleared their table, gathered pencils and paper, and went to work. Betty had a theory. The killer was such an egomaniac that he probably began his message with the word I. They looked for recurring symbol patterns that might spell the word kill. Their theory held up. Within days, 2 amateur codebreakers had solved what the FBI and CIA had failed to crack. The decoded message was chilling in its casual brutality. The Zodiac wrote that he enjoyed killing because it was fun. More fun than hunting wild game because man is the most dangerous animal of all. He wrote that when he died, he would be reborn in paradise, and that all the people he had killed would become his slaves in the afterlife. He said he would not give his name because he did not want investigators to slow down his collection of slaves for the next life. The attacks continued. On September 27, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a picnic on the shore of Lake Berryessa when a powerfully built man emerged wearing a black executioner's hood with a white cross stitched on the chest, or the same symbol the Zodiac used to sign his letters. The man tied them up and stabbed both of them repeatedly. Brian survived with severe injuries. Cecilia did not. About an hour later, a calm voice called the Napa Police Department and reported a double murder. Then he hung up. Police found a message written on the door of Brian's car. The dates of the previous Zodiac murders and today's date. The killer was keeping score, and he wanted everyone to know it. Less than a month later, on October 11, 1969, a taxi driver named Paul Stein was shot and killed in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. Teenagers watching from a nearby window witnessed the attack and called police. The responding officers actually stopped and spoke to a stocky man walking in the fog nearby, a man who matched the description perfectly, and let him go. They had been given an incorrect description of the suspect over the radio. Two of the officers would later publicly admit they had almost certainly spoken to the Zodiac killer himself, and had driven away. The Chronicle received another letter days later. Inside was a piece of Paul Stein's blood-soaked shirt. Proof of the killing, and a new threat. The Zodiac wrote that school children made a nice target. He described shooting out the front tire of a school bus and picking up the children as they came out. The Bay Area erupted in panic. 65 school buses in Napa County alone were assigned police escorts. Armed officers patrolled routes. Planes flew overhead. Dozens of jurisdictions went on full alert. And the killer wrote another letter, this time including a hand-drawn diagram of a bomb he planned to plant on a school bus. The investigation was already struggling under the weight of its own complexity. The murders had occurred across 3 different police jurisdictions, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco, and the 3 departments were often working independently rather than sharing information. Coordinating with outside experts was slow and complicated. The fingerprints lifted from Paul Stein's taxi matched no one in the records. The handwriting analysis produced no useful leads. And the Zodiac, with apparent awareness of exactly how law enforcement worked, seemed to exploit every gap and delay in the system with calculated precision. The second major cipher, sent after the television show incident in which a mentally ill hospital patient called in claiming to be the Zodiac and spent hours on air before being identified, was far more complex than the first. It contained 340 characters and was composed of 63 different symbols. The FBI worked on it, the NSA worked on it, the American Cryptogram Association worked on it, naval cryptographers worked on it. Hundreds of amateur codebreakers spent years attempting to crack it. For 51 years, the cipher remained unbroken. Then, in December 2020, 3 men working simultaneously across different continents, an American software developer, a Belgian computer programmer, and an Australian mathematician, finally cracked it. Using a combination of diagonal transposition techniques and advanced decryption software, they extracted a coherent message. The Zodiac wrote that he hoped investigators were having fun trying to catch him. He confirmed that he had not been the caller on the television program, and he reiterated his belief that dying would send him to paradise where his victims would serve him as slaves. The FBI officially confirmed the decryption 2 days later. It was described as a small sensation among people who had spent their lives obsessing over the case. But it brought investigators no closer to identifying who had written it. The primary suspect identified by investigators over the years was a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a former school teacher from Vallejo who matched the general physical description, had known Darlene Ferrin casually, lived in the area during the murders, and had made deeply disturbing statements to friends about wanting to kill couples and send cryptic letters to police. He was the only suspect ever publicly named. Multiple search warrants were executed against him over the years. His home was searched, his vehicle was searched, and every time, the evidence failed to connect him conclusively to the crimes. His fingerprints did not match those found at crime scenes. His handwriting did not match the Zodiac letters. And decades later, advances in DNA analysis effectively ruled him out entirely. Allen died in 1992, having never been charged with anything. He was 58 years old. Over the decades that followed, more than 2,500 suspects were investigated in San Francisco alone. Psychics were consulted, including one who claimed to be receiving mental transmissions directly from the Zodiac killer and who accompanied police to crime scenes to pick up vibrations. None of it produced anything of value. Amateur detective groups formed and dissolved. Books were written. Films were made. In 2021, a group of approximately 40 amateur investigators publicly announced they had identified the Zodiac as a former member of the United States Air Force. Police dismissed the claim as theory without hard evidence. The case officially remains open and unsolved. What the Zodiac case reveals, beyond the horror of the individual murders and the extraordinary complexity of the hunt that followed, is something about the relationship between violence, media, and public fascination that remains as relevant today as it was in 1969. The The Zodiac understood that killing was not enough to achieve what he wanted. He wanted terror. He wanted fame. He wanted the entire Bay Area to be afraid to leave their homes, afraid to let their children ride the school bus, afraid to park in a quiet spot on a dark road on a Friday night. And he achieved all of it, not just through the murders themselves, but through the letters, the ciphers, the threats, the phone calls, the careful management of his own public image as something unknowable and unstoppable. He was a killer who understood public relations, and in the most disturbing possible way, it worked. More than 50 years after his last confirmed communication, his crosshair symbol is still instantly recognizable. His ciphers are still being analyzed. His identity is still being debated. He wanted to be remembered. He is. Welcome to World Unveiled. The Zodiac Killer was never caught. He was never identified. And somewhere in the archived files of 3 California police departments, the evidence that might finally answer the question still waits, preserved, cataloged, and as yet unexplained.